and take a seat.
While you're being seated, go ahead and take your Bibles, turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. In a moment, we're going to read verses 9 through 21. Romans 12, 9 through 21. Finish up this section as we explore what it looks like to take up the laid down life. As you're turning there, when we started ManDown 9 years ago, we knew that what we wanted to do was present a countercultural vision of what it looked like to be a man and what it meant to be godly. And the only way we could do that is root it in the pattern of the gospel. And we called it ManDown because we thought in a lot of ways it wasn't very appealing. And it didn't make a lot of sense. And the truth is, in many ways, the call to the gospel is counterintuitive. It goes against the grain of our expectations. And for us to call one another together to lay down our lives, to take up a life of laying ourselves down, was exactly the message we wanted to say, that that is what God shapes in us as the gospel plays itself out in our lives and we move out into the world. And so really these three messages have been meant to explain to some degree to you what taking up the laid down life means. And so as we read this, we're going to finish out this exposition of Romans 12, beginning in verse 9. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another and showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be conceited. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Raise your hands tonight if you know who Helmuth von Moltke is. We've got one, two who know who Helmuth von Moltke is. So we got a few Moltke fans in the house. Helmuth von Moltke was a 19th century Prussian military commander who keenly observed that no plan of operations extends with certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main strength. Moltke's observation is, of course, the now ubiquitous saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's a pithy way of expressing the disorientation that we experience when we step into life with certain aspirations and fresh commitments, but fail to realize that reality has no plans of working with us in our cause. You may recognize the same sentiment from a more expected bastion of life wisdom, Mike Tyson, who famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I was curious about that quote this past week and found an article originally published by the South Florida Sun-Sentinel a few years back where the reporter sat down and asked Tyson about this now famous quote and what he had to say about it after these years. And he talked about what the first time he said it, and he said this. He elaborated on it, and he said, people were asking me before a fight, what's going to happen? Tyson said, They were talking about his style, and the guy was fighting. He's going to give you a lot of lateral movement. He's going to move. He's going to dance. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. And I said, everybody has a plan until they get hit. Then like a rat, they stop in fear and freeze. Well, here in the remainder of Romans chapter 12, the Apostle Paul, after moving us to join him in this devotion to God of living a life laid down in sacrifice, a reasonable act of worship, and moves us in this way, and then giving us this picture that we all have gifts to engage, and stirring us up to think about what it means to serve one another. He is convinced that we need to consider what it looks like as we begin to leave thinking about living a life laid down to the reality of actually doing it. There's an amazing gap between theory and reality. We can sit here all day talking about making our lives a living sacrifice and considering how God has gifted us to lay down our gifts and how he gloriously uses that in cooperation with one another to advance the gospel, to enrich our lives, to mature us, to give glory to God. And we can be stirred up in that affection and be excited and have done nothing. And then we return to our homes tonight, to our barracks, to our work. And at the first sense in which reality isn't really working with our new aspiration, like a rat, we freeze. And it's gone. Because everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And what the Apostle Paul begins to do here is he helps us consider, what might it look like? What do you need to be prepared for? What do we need to be prepared for in the practical workings of everyday life if we are really going to answer this honorable, powerful, reasonable call to a laid down life? Will we prepare ourselves for the moment when we get punched in the mouth? So he prepares us to face difficult realities in the world that we actually live in, where we're going to have to work out this calling reasonably, where we're going to have to work out this calling with courage and grit and perseverance and suffering, if we're going to experience the grace and power that comes with it. And what he really wants us to understand is that without the ongoing transformation of the gospel, where our mind is being renewed, where we walk from faith to faith to faith, as we take steps of obedience and we enter into considering in our heart what is going on, how we are processing the gospel, without this transforming work that's renewing our mind, we will never answer this call when we encounter reality. Our life will fail to be genuine, our love will fail to be genuine, and our witness will lack power unless we are consistently, through the work of the Holy Spirit, conferring with God as we encounter reality about what it looks like to live a gospel-shaped life, where we trust God that as we lay ourselves down for others, he, through the power that raised Jesus from the dead, raises up newness. Transforming change. And it's the gospel shape of our love that is transformative, and it's the gospel shape of our witness that gives it power in the community. You see, the gospel shape of our love will determine the transformation we experience around us and others experience in connection with us. And the gospel shape of our witness will determine whether we have credibility and power. And he shows us that here in these passages. I want to look at it in two ways. The first thing he says, I would put it this way: the laid down life in the church produces genuine love. So practically speaking, if you begin to live a laid down life in the midst of other believers and with other Christians, it will produce a community of genuine love. Practical love that works itself out in bodily ways. It's why in verse 1 he says that we are to present our bodies, because our bodies is where life actually happens. It's one thing to devote your mind and your will. It's a whole other thing to engage your whole person, body with you, that where you are, there the living sacrifice will be displayed. And he says the laid down life in the church produces, as we bring those sacrifices together, it produces a culture of genuine love. Let's look specifically at verses 9 through 13. This is what he's doing in these verses in 9 through 13. Notice what he says first. Let love be genuine. In our English translation, everything in verse 9 through 13 just feels like an endless set of back-to-back commands, doesn't it? Like quick phrases. Let your love be genuine. Here's a list. Hang on. You're ready for the list? And he goes down through the list. And it reminds me of what it's like when I let my wife know that I'm going to run out to the store. And I got a couple things I'm going to get. She's like, well, hang on, I got a couple things. And she starts rattling things off, right? And before long, I'm like, man, that's just way too many things. Do you have two? Right? And I just need it because I can't remember all those, or just text them to me. But it feels like back-to-back commands. And while it's true that Paul wants us to live this way, and he is giving us instruction here about how we should live, he is actually, what's happening here is he's giving us insight on how to avoid a claim to love that is really hypocritical. He's concerned that we would say, I want to be a living sacrifice and I want to love other people, but he's showing us how to avoid having a claim to love that in reality, when it's measured against what actually happens, is really hypocritical and lacks substance. A laid down life in theory and not in practice. In verse 9, you probably have something like the words, let love be genuine. Is that what you got? Most of you guys are using the English Standard Version, right? Or something like it. And let love be genuine is in your translation, which is sort of the force of what Paul wants, but the closest translation here would simply be, love is not hypocritical. That's actually what it says. It says exactly, love is not hypocritical. It's actually not written in directive form. It's actually explanatory. And so he's describing the laid down life, and he says, let me tell you about love. Love is not hypocritical. The phrase in Greek is a colorful theatrical one associated with actors who wore masks to play a different character than the person they really were. It's anhypokrites. So it's this play actor, and he says love is not being a play actor. So Paul is saying love is not the sort of thing that reality can unmask to reveal that beneath the surface there's no substance. Love is not the sort of thing that when we encounter reality, it can unmask us as someone who only wants to speak about love and isn't willing to lay down their life to see it worked out and displayed in actuality in their bodies. That's not love. And so he's saying love is not that sort of thing where beneath the surface there's no substance. From there, what happens is he says love is not hypocritical, and then all the other verbal elements of instruction that you have there are actually participles, which really mean that they serve to explain what he's just said, that love is not hypocritical. What does it look like then? So what does this laid down life of genuine love in the body look like? It looks like all the rest of these words helping us get a picture of what that is. And so the way you should hear it is by putting ing ending on the verbs, which really represents the text. And so he's saying something like, love is unhypocritical, abhorring what is evil and holding fast to what is good. Because a love that is willing to overlook evil and not contribute to what is good, and a love that flirts with what is not good and easily abandons what is not love at all. It's love on the surface, but it's not love in substance. And so he says love is unhypocritical, exercising a family type of affection with one another as brothers. You see, a hypocritical kind of love says that there's enough distance that I don't have to be terribly involved in your life. But a love in substance where I'm laying down myself, it says love is not hypocritical. It has the substance of being familially tied where I don't abandon you because I can't. We are united with one another. Therefore, we are willing to stir up between ourselves a warmth of genuine brotherly affection that you would find in a familial setting. And if it's not there, he says, the substance of love isn't present, though the words are. Love is not hypocritical, outdoing one another and showing honor. There's something fake about a love that is really trying to get you to honor me rather than me working to honor you. There's something lacking in substance where my goal in relationship to you and when I'm present with you is wanting to accrue your respect rather than working to find what's good in you and inflame it with encouragement. That's real love and substance. So he keeps going. Love is unhypocritical, serving the Lord in our love for one another without a slothfulness and a real fervency of spirit. So to say that we love someone and to say that we love one another while we are lazy about trying to stir one another up to good deeds and is the sort of thing that is love in word but not in substance. There's something hypocritical about a love for one another that is sluggish and doesn't have the sort of fervency of someone who has been given a task by someone they really respect. So actually what he says, we are to not be slothful in zeal because we've been given a task by the Lord. Consider what he means. He said, when somebody who you deeply, deeply respect comes into your life and asks you to do something, it's a game changer. You drop what you're doing and you go and do it. You don't even mind doing it. And so he says, this is what real love that is unhypocritical looks like, that in our relationships with one another, we aren't slothful in zeal. We're motivated because we have been given this opportunity as an act of worship to the Lord to lay down our lives by stirring one another up with zeal. What does genuine love look like? In hope, it's rejoicing. In trials, it's enduring. In prayer, devoting ourselves to one another. This is the substance of a laid down life in the church that creates a culture that is worth looking in on and seeing that something is radically transformed. And here's what this all means for us. Genuine love survives contact with reality and is shown to be full of substance. You see, in all of these situations, when you face the challenging realities of time going on, there's still a fervency in serving the Lord because the love is genuine. It's not hypocritical. It's a love in substance because our life has been laid down and it's no longer about us. All kinds of practical ways, you see, he's saying, if you were wondering last night, what does it look like now for me to live a life of sacrifice to God, to be a living sacrifice in my body devoted to my reasonable service before God? He says this is what it looks like. In the body, we're building a culture like this that strengthens every person with this kind of love. Some of you are saying that sounds like more than I want out of church. Let's just be honest. That's way more than I want out of this little tangential social thing I do occasionally to make sure if I've got some need in my life, there'll be people there. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're right. It's way more than you probably bargained for. And it may be way more than you came into church life looking for. But I'm going to tell you right now, there's nothing here in our churches worth even pursuing unless we're going to pursue this. Listen, you can find everything else. You can find hypocritical love in every other circle of society. You can find hypocritical love at your workplace. You can find hypocritical love in your natural family. You can find hypocritical love in your neighborhood. But there's only one place where you can find a laid down love that is compelled by a gospel that can raise your life from the dead. There's only one place that it's reasonable to say, I will pour out everything, because in pouring out everything, I've lost nothing. You can't even take it from me, and I want you to experience this kind of culture. I want you to know my faith rests in Christ. He will raise up what I have laid down. You don't even know until you've come and seen it. And when we start living like that, people will be compelled. I don't want to be a part. You and I don't want to be a part of this other thing. And we need so much more. And listen, this is a men's retreat, and it's not about us in this room. Our children in our churches need this kind of real love expressed and displayed. Our wives and the young women who we worship with, they need to see this kind of love demonstrated in our homes, in our churches, in our marriages, in relation to our neighbors, in our communities. Love, which is the laid down life in relationships, love is not hypocritical. When it encounters the hard realities of the world, it has deep, beautiful, gospel-shaped substance. And this is what it looks like for us to lay our lives down. And so he says that in those verses, the laid down life in the church produces this powerful culture of genuine love that is revealed to have more and more substance as it's tested by reality. And then he shows us in the rest of the verses that the laid down life in the community is the only thing that will produce a Godward witness. The laid down life as we encounter the community produces a real Godward witness. The lack of power in our evangelism starts with the lack of love in our churches. Our lack of power with the gospel being displayed in compelling people to join and see and marvel at the goodness of Jesus begins with the lack of love they see in the midst of the churches. And I'm not talking about sentimental love that doesn't abhor what is evil and cling fast to what is good. I'm talking about courageous, godly, manly love. The kind of grit that we can display so others can build their lives with us in the shape of the gospel as we exalt Christ. And without that, we don't have much to say to people about what's valuable. But here, with the theme of persecution introduced in verse 14, most commentators recognize that there's a shift from focusing how genuine love is played out in the church to how it's played out as we encounter the community around us in an election season and in a season of distress and in a season of difficulty, in a season of division and strife, in a season where we might not always, as Christians who love the gospel, be characterized the way we would like to be. He says, here's what it actually looks like to respond. He introduces this theme of persecution and shifts from focusing how that genuine love is played out in the church to how it's played out as we encounter the community around us with our faith and bear witness that we're people of the cross. And in the text again, we should keep in mind that it all is controlled by this desire to show us what genuine love looks like as we encounter reality. Not just theoretically. You see, often we're willing to say, I'll love if it works. I'm going to go on and do this, God, but it's got to fix the things I want it to fix. Some of you brothers are in difficult marriages, or maybe difficult seasons of your marriage, or just stretching, straining times. And you're saying, okay, I hear you. I'll lay down my life, but it's got to work. And if it doesn't work this week, I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing before. That's not what he's talking about here. He's saying we lay it down in faith and we trust God to work out what the results would be. Because as Jesus laid down his life in faith, he trusted the Father to work out what the results would be. And until you've suffered with blood, you haven't suffered to the extent to which he suffered to save you, so you have still an experience to enjoy in communing with the Savior who suffers. And he says here, this whole pattern is about our witness actually being exalted and raised up and strengthened by suffering and rejection. So that as our love encounters reality, the expectation is reality would kick us in the teeth, and yet as it does it, we would graciously point people to Jesus. And so he goes on, he says, love is not hypocritical, blessing those who persecute us. Our witness fails to point to our Godward hope when it turns to evil as soon as it's mistreated. Love is not hypocritical, rejoicing with those who rejoice, and weeping with those who weep. He doesn't just picture this as a conquering battle where we're working against enemies in our community because they haven't yet come to faith in Christ and don't agree with our witness. He pictures it as us being able to understand the wreckage that sin causes. And when somebody's able to rejoice, to be able to rejoice with them. And when they're broken by sin and life is hard and they're hurting, to be able to weep with them. Love is not hypocritical. I'll love you as long as you come to church with me. I'll love you as long as you start to show an interest in the gospel. It shows up when people are rejoicing, and we rejoice with them and celebrate, and it shows up when people are weeping and other people are running the other direction because it's uncomfortable. And we just are willing to be there. Our witness fails to point to our Godward hope when we communicate that we're unconcerned about what people are actually experiencing in this world, and are willing to just be in our Christian circles and unconcerned about the difficulty that life brings into everybody's lives. Love is not hypocritical, being seen in harmony with one another. Our witness will fail to point to our Godward hope when its power cannot cause us to live in harmony with those who share our faith. This is what he's saying. Love is not hypocritical. It gives thought to what is honorable in the sight of all and makes for peace. We may not always come to agreement or be in control of whether we are at peace. We may not always be seen as honorable, but our witness will fail to point people Godward when we're not strongly concerned about how our lives and decisions communicate what matters most to us in the midst of a watching world. And in the midst of reality, Paul wants us to be sure, to make abundantly clear what a faithful witness will look like. And he says it will look like loving our enemies and entrusting everything else to God. He says saves the most stark ideas for the end when he says really clearly, love is not hypocritical. It doesn't avenge itself. And he just starts to directly say to us, never avenge yourselves. You see how he changes person? He changes person to talk about, he's talking about love and all the flow, but then he just says, never avenge yourselves. You see, what he wants to say is that as love encounters reality, if we want it to be gospel-shaped, we lay down our lives and we point to our absolute trust in God, that he is the one that should he determine that vengeance is necessary rather than salvation, that he alone would be the one with the privilege of doing that. And we have no place, that our role is to love our enemies, to clothe those who need clothes, to feed those who need to be fed. He says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And entrust to the Lord. We never avenge ourselves. We're not driven personally by a desire for vengeance. We don't repay evil for evil, he says. We never attempt to wield evil to overcome evil, but take refuge in doing what is good, even when we expect that in the near term it means suffering and failure. Do you see how clearly he says it here at the end? Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Now, why does he paint this picture that looks like, as we might say, laying down against our enemy? This is what he says, right? In relation to your enemy, it looks like laying down, being defeated, clothing them, feeding them, even in the midst of persecution, blessing them, enduring on their behalf, because we know that we have a faithful God who cares for us. We have a faithful God who is going to take what we've offered to him in worship, and he does something powerful and amazing in transforming us. Why do we do that? Well, here's the answer. Because this kind of life, the reason we do it is because that's how we were saved. The way that you were saved, brother, if you're here and you have trusted the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior, you were saved through this kind of love. The Jesus we bear witness to entrusted himself on the cross fully to God, and before the eyes of his persecutors was defeated. In their presence, he put his hope in the Father for his own rescue, his own vindication. He was not vengeful, but filled with compassion for those who in their ignorance would treat him with dishonor, even nailing him to the cross. And because he did, he finished the work of testifying to the saving power of God and accomplishing our salvation through his suffering. Through what Jesus laid down, we have been raised up. This is the message of the gospel. Through what Jesus was willing to lay down, you have been raised and seated with him in the heavenlies. Now let's join him in laying more lives down. More lives down that testify Godward, that we don't seek what we can get for ourselves in this world, because God has everything that we really need. The harsh reality of a sinful world did not overcome him even in his death. And because of it, he overcame death and sin forever. He didn't only accomplish our salvation, he showed us how we can bear witness to our hope in God as people watch our lives. These moments of reality, the practical ones that we've been talking about, these moments of reality, they hit us. And they force us to reckon with the weakness of our theoretical commitment to a laid down life, our theoretical devotion. They force us to reckon with our weakness. Can I live this laid down life when I go home tonight in reality? Up the road from here is a place called Caroline Furnace. And some of you guys who went hiking weren't far from it, I don't think, today. And I remember I was up there a few years ago, and this is a place where they made pig iron. And there's all these charts about this old furnace where they would basically, out of the ground, they would take the iron ore and they would take it through this process of burning and get it ready and prepare it. And I remember reading at one point about the furnace that was made to produce this iron, and noted that at the bottom there was a container where the melted metal would fall. Under this intense heat, things would happen amongst the ore, and this melted metal would fall to the bottom, and it would be caught in this crucible. This crucible, this little bowl at the bottom that caught what was really being purified. And through that process, what would happen is this ore that had been in one form was being transformed in this crucible into something useful for a new purpose. It's being shaped. And a crucible really is a word for this pot that is used often in metallurgy to put into the fire something that bears one shape, that it might be melted and refashioned for something else. And we often think about the gospel working itself from our inside out into these realities of the world, but there's another thing going on here that Paul is calling us to. The transforming work he talks about in verses 1 and 2 happen as by faith, even at times against our better sense and our better desires, we devote ourselves to a laid down life like the ones pictured here. And in the world, we do this even when we thought a different strategy would be better. When we thought standing up for ourselves and fighting back against those who are persecuting us would be better, we laid down our lives and we went through the intense pressure of a difficult moment in a difficult season. And there in that crucible, in the shape of a cross, which is where the word comes from, this transforming bowl, our lives are being reshaped. Our lives are reshaped as we engage in this kind of genuine laid down love and refashioned into the shape of the cross. And day by day, as we encounter reality and we're faced and we take steps of faith in love, not only are we exhibiting something and being faithful in our worship to the Lord is using those moments to transform us. That we might approve with him what is good. Genuine love is not only what is born in us by God through the work of the Holy Spirit, it's the form that we pour ourselves into to be refashioned and learn to trust him increasingly as he overcomes every evil with good, including that which remains in us. And real life is a crucible that brings us face to face with our need for the transforming work of the gospel in the shape of the cross. And as we allow our lives to be poured into this form of genuine love, it produces a genuine love in our churches and a powerful witness in our communities that glorifies Christ. Brothers, this is what we've been called to. This is our reasonable service. These are the practical ways in which God is calling you to have your life refashioned. And the real question that you have to go away with is whether you trust God to raise your life up as you lay it down. Let's pray. Lord, take these moments and stir by your Spirit fresh faith in us to entrust ourselves to you. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to invite Jared to come on up, and Bobby is going to join me here. We're going to talk a little bit about some other practical ways pastorally we think that you can work these things out.
Amen. Thanks for that word, Colby. Just definitely blessed me for sure. So you started off, you were using the illustration of the Mike Tyson quote, right? And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, both of you guys, is what's the most important step that we can take to ensure that when life hits us, when we get home, we go back to our families, back to our workplaces, we don't freeze like a rat, like Mike Tyson said, right? When we get punched in the mouth by life and abandon the laid down life and kind of leave it at the conceptual level rather than putting it into practice. Like, what are the most important steps these guys can take to keep that from happening as they go home?
Start?
Well, I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I suspect Mike Tyson is good at that because he's probably froze a couple times in training. He got punched in the face a couple times and has learned to. You watch the hips and you can see it coming because he's learned a couple times that that's the hard way. So I don't know if I've really got the experience to not freeze all the time, meaning I should expect to freeze sometime, and hopefully the brothers that know me well enough will watch for me freezing. Often sort of an outside perspective will be more helpful than sort of me cloudy in the middle. So I don't know where I'm sort of shortcoming in that area. Yeah, hopefully brothers and sisters in the church will say, I think particularly my wife will say, you're probably going to get punched, and you should probably move. And that time and time again has been the thing that's bailed me out, either from getting punched again harder while I'm down, or if I'm lucky, avoiding that punch in the first place.
Yeah, I think we underestimate decisiveness. Like, one of the things that Paul's doing and appealing to us is that before we go into a situation like life in general, that you would have a settled decisiveness that you want to live a laid down life. I think potentially, and this is just sort of guessing, like many of you walked into the weekend without a whole lot of clarity about the importance of just seeing your life as entirely devoted to God, and having this shape of laying it down and being sacrificial. And where there's a lack of clarity, there's a lack of decisiveness. And for some of you today, you can't make it happen, but you can certainly decide to express to God that your genuine aspiration today is, as you return to life, is that it would look like this. That this is what you want above all else. And some of you are wrestling with whether you've ever devoted yourself to saying that and to that being true about you. And because of that, you're much more likely to think, I'll just experiment with it. And this isn't something you just experiment with. You respond to the fact that Jesus, this is what it means by faith to trust what Jesus has done for us in the cross, that we would respond. And so the response is an invitation for us to get with God and say, Lord, we're going to, I know I can't sustain it, you can, but I'm devoting myself to you. And I think that's an important thing for us to do before the Lord.
So one of the most powerful things you talked about was talking about how when we love one another in genuine, community as a church, it's a powerful witness to others, right? It gives veracity to the gospel. And so, I've thought a lot about over recent years about how I think in American church culture, a lot of times it's, people go to a worship service to watch a few people use their gifts, right? And the pastors are the ones doing the ministry. So why don't you just talk to these guys, if you're just a church member, maybe you're not on staff, you're not even an elder or something like that, how important is their role, even on like a Sunday morning when they walk into church, or on a Wednesday night at a prayer meeting or at a small group, how important is their role in making this happen? And what are what can you do on a Sunday morning to put Romans 12, 9 to 21 into practice?
My answer to that would be your role is everything. Honestly, the church is made up of members. It's made up of godly members who are devoting themselves to walking in love. You should be way less impressed with your leaders, way less impressed with the people who play pastoral roles, and expect, in one sense, that there's no way that they can help every member in your body live a laid-down life. And so therefore you're critical. And so every Sunday that you come to gather for fellowship, yeah, sure, we're meeting with God, we're being encouraged, but there are other people present who you're the only one who can really verbalize, talk to, understand, and care for. And, like my ability to do that personally is really limited. I mean, maybe I could be really good at it and be that kind of person for 20 people, maybe. And, most of our churches have more than 20 people. And we, not even the leaders can know the conversations you have with another brother that you're closer with than any leader is. And therefore, having this role of knowing this is our vision, this is who we need to be, and deepening the conversations to do that is such a critical role. So saying to someone after the sermon, what did you take away from that? What did you hear today? What do you need to think about? How can I pray for you as you work this out in obedience? Mm-hmm. Just simple things, right? But think about if every member in the church was doing that to other people, what it would look like in sort of bearing out the word being applied in our lives. And so you're critical, absolutely critical.
Anything you'd add about it?
Yeah, I mean, that underscores the necessity of covenant church membership. It's like membership that's undergirded and supported by a covenant you enter into with other brothers. I mean, and the rest of the church. For us, our covenant is written and displayed on the wall for us to see and remind ourselves, and we aim to read it at our church meetings to say, this is the promise we made to walk with one another, and it's the regular sort of reminder that, the expectations that we place on one particular person or leader in the church is usually too heavy for that person to bear, like what you're saying, and the bullseye is sharing that burden with one another. And for some, the weak ought to carry the burdens, or the strong ought to carry the burden of the weak. There is going to be a disproportionate amount of people helping, serving a greater amount, maybe. But at the end of the day, the bullseye is what's recounted in your covenant. The bullseye is Romans chapter 12, reiterated over and over again in the gospel. And the Sunday morning then just becomes where that's just, we remind one another of that. And I was talking with members of the church today at lunch and said, Sunday's just like the first touchstone of the week. If it's 2 hours once a week you see with them, then you're probably not going to be able to do that with one another. So you have to actually be in their lives, which means being intentional, show up, be a friend, be a brother, live life with them, whatever it looks like. Yeah.
So towards the end, you used the example of the crucible, right? And you talked about how when we begin to put these things into practice, lay our lives down, it shapes and forms us into Christ-likeness, which is sanctification, right? And I think that one thing that struck me as I was sitting there is, like this isn't like there's not like a plan A and a plan B for Christianity. Like this isn't Christianity plus. Like this isn't optional. In other words, right? Like this is actually what Christianity is, and we don't really have a choice when it comes to sanctification. So I mean, this might be kind of an obvious question, but what would you say maybe to guys who are sitting there going, I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I really want to make the sacrifice that it would take and to deny my flesh, to, to lay my life down and actually put these things into practice because, like, you don't know what it's like in my home and how ungrateful my wife is, and I just don't know how I could actually, like, love her like this right now. Like, what would you say to guys who are kind of maybe there right now?
I would say I might be on the fence about whether you're a Christian. And, there's only one Christian life, the laid down Christian life. Jesus says it really clearly. The gospel, in the Gospels, he says, you take up your cross and you follow me. That's what it looks like. And that doesn't mean we do it perfectly, but my point is if it's a question of willingness, if it's a question of desire, if it's a question of whether I have any interest of laying my life down as a living sacrifice and do that, then somewhere along the way we miss the fact that the only stuff that gets raised up is the stuff that's placed in God's hands. And so the promise of the gospel is that my seed falls in the ground and God gives it life. And so if we're there and we go, I don't know if I want to live a life like that, then the question is, who are you trusting? What kind of life do you want to live? And in what manner does that reflect the Spirit's work of giving you a new heart and leading you on in that? Now, one other part, though. If you're just saying, I'm struggling to trust the practical part of that, then I would say you need a community of brothers who will encourage you that it's worth it. That you need to be reminded of the gospel, rooted in the gospel, and you need to actually become more fluent in believing and thinking about the gospel as the narrative that you're in, as the one that you are actually is being lived out in your life. And so, I think we have to think about whether it's a willingness thing or it's a weakness thing,
Yeah, I think that to the extent that you're sort of reticent to do what's commanded in Scripture is the extent to which you're reticent to obey Jesus and to live underneath the gospel. So that should be really clear. And just say that's a contrast between what the gospel demands of everyone who lives under it and the way you're living. At the end of the day, we struggle with affections. That's kind of where it's a struggle to believe, it's a struggle to understand to some degree, but it's really like what has grasped my affections? And if a desire for an easy marriage and an easy work life and comfort is the thing which all my affections are drawn to, then yeah, I'm going to be unwilling to sacrifice any of that for the sake of some book that tells me I should. I think often of an essay that I think Colby maybe introduced to me, Chalmers' essay of what gets one affection out, a better affection, a greater affection. So I've got to have something that my heart is set on that's not going to be moved by the harsh reality of the world or the difficulty of doing what the Bible says. And that's a greater, deeper love for Jesus more than my own comfort, my pleasure, my fleshly desires, the hard relationships that marriage and children and families and church membership makes for you. So, yeah, to the extent that you're unwilling to do that is the extent that you're unwilling to submit to the Lord of the gospel.
It's a beautiful step of faith in marriage, one that I struggle to make at times in my life, to say, well, Lord, I'm not getting what I want out of this situation, right? I'm not getting what I'm looking for here, but you've called me to respond in a certain way. And I don't, and again, I want to break this thing where it works. I think if you're there, what I would say is you're kind of fooling yourself or deceiving yourself to think that that whether it works is the way to decide whether we do it. That's why 12, 1 and 2 are there, because first it's worship. It's worship. Then it's love to them. Like we serve the Lord by going, I'm gonna put off my anger and speak with gentleness, even though I think probably a strong voice would affect and accomplish what I want it to, but I'm misled in that. I need what God would do in my marriage. I need what God would do in my relationship if I would trust Him by faith with gentleness that He calls for. And then that's my act of worship. And He takes that act of worship and does with it what He pleases. It's not for me to say, but you need to make it so that then, my wife respects me more because I was gentle. Maybe she will 10 years from now if you keep it up. But that has nothing to do with whether you endure in doing what is good before God. right? And, that doesn't just apply to marriage. It applies to parenting. It applies to how we live in the workplace. And, we got to stop asking, does it work? Because the whole end of these verses is unconcerned with whether it works. It's saying, what's the, worst case scenario that Paul imagines could happen to you? You would die because you were faithful to what the Lord called. And he's not even worried about that. He said, just let the Lord take care of that. That's the picture he's giving us of what it is. And so we have to snip the wire between what works, and we have to worship God in those moments and let him begin to show us the better way as we walk with him.
There you go. I think, Bobby, you kind of hit it on the head when you said affections, right? It goes back to where do our affections lie. If we're doing it for what works, then it shows that our greatest affection isn't really Jesus. It's not Jesus we want most. It's the result that we want most. It's my wife to respect me, or if it's my children to obey me, or it's my boss to commend me, or whatever it might be that we want most more than Jesus. But when the Apostle Paul understood to live as Christ, to die is gain, and it kind of goes back to Jamie's message earlier this morning. When we understand grace that's been extended to us, like God didn't love us because it works, right? Like God loved us because God is love. It's just sheer grace when we were doing nothing to deserve it. And the reality is many of us ran from God for much of our lives. Christ died for us while we were still sinners.
Yeah.
Christ didn't die for us because we started getting our act together, and we can't love our wives just because they're starting to cooperate, right? When we love. Like, that's not godly love. That's a worldly, it's a hypocritical
and
love.
that godly love you just described is beautiful.
Yeah.
The gospel is beautiful. When the gospel is beautiful before our eyes, then we think, I want to do that beautiful thing. I want to work out that beautiful thing in the situation, non-ideal as it may be. That's what starts to become beautiful to us. And we start working that out, and we say, so we go to the gospel to see beauty. We go to the gospel to see this love that captures our heart so that we can go, you know what? I want to just display that. And rather than this hypocritical love that we generally want.
Amen. Amen.
So,
yeah. That's good.
What I'd like to do as we finish up, we're going to, in a moment,